Let's talk about how to make this boule. You start off with your flours. That's 1 1/3 cup Steve's bread flour, or 185 grams. Next you add 2/3 cup, or 105 grams of Teff flour. Next add 1/2 teaspoon psyllium husk powder and a little over 1/2 teaspoon salt. Plus 1 1/8 teaspoon yeast. That's about 4 grams of yeast. Make sure it doesn't touch the salt, as it can deactivate it. So that's it for the dry ingredients. Just give them a quick whisk or stir because you don't want the psyllium husk powder to be clumped together or it can form lumps in the dough. So next you add the wet ingredients. For this recipe it's only 2. That's water and oil. That's about 1 1/2 cups of warm water, 335 milliliters, and 26 milliliters of olive oil. Now you can do this in the bowl of a standing mixer, but I prefer to just get in there, use my hands, do it in a bowl, because that way you really get to know your bread. You get to know what the dough should feel like. It seems kind of messy at first, and it will also seem kind of liquidy, but it'll start to come together as you keep mixing. Next, I just put a little kind of swig of olive oil in the bottom of the bowl and coat the bottom and the side of the bowl, because this is the bowl the bread will be proofing in, so it'll keep it from sticking. So this will take about 30 to 60 minutes to rise. It really depends on the ambient temperature of the room and how warm your water was. Obviously you don't want to use water that's hot because it can also kill the yeast, so if you use cold water, that's fine. It'll just take longer for it to rise. So we'll come back when this is doubled in volume. So the bread is done proofing. I want to show you why telling when it's done proofing can be a little tricky. I'm going to show you 2 ways you can tell, and you kind of want to test both. So if you press lightly, it feels spongy and it bounces back. If you poke the bread, say like 1/2 inch in, it doesn't really bounce back. It bounces back very, very slowly. That means it's done. So some people use just one of these methods, and that's why it's confusing, because they say, oh, it bounces back, or I wait to see until it doesn't bounce back. It actually depends how deeply you prod the proofed bread. So if you poke it, which is pretty reliable method, you poke it fairly deeply, like at least, you know, more than half a centimeter, up to 1/2 inch. And if it doesn't really bounce back, then you know it's done. But that can affect the shape of the loaf. In this case, the top is going to be the bottom, because next we're going to turn the proofed bread out onto a parchment-lined baking tray. So the places where you poke the bread will not show. And even if they do, it's not really a big deal. Now my bread didn't end up being perfectly round, but that's fine. So next I'm going to score it. So I'm going to do a crisscross on top that's about 2 inches long, or 5 centimeters long, 2 lines that are about 1/2 centimeter, 1/4 inch deep. All right, so this is ready to go into the oven. Before you put it in, you want to heat up about 1 cup to 1.5 cups of hot water. So you want the water to be boiling. And you put the bread into the middle rack into the oven. And then in the rack below, you have an empty baking tray where you pour in the boiling water. This creates steam right when you pour the water in. So then you close the oven door to trap the steam, and this will give your bread a really nice crust. Let's do it. Oh, also I should say that the oven is 450 degrees. It's really hot, and that will also help create a really nice crust. Once the loaf is done baking, you can see that it has a nice crust on the outside. You can hear just how crispy it is, and on the bottom, it also sounds hollow. So just remember that you do want to let your loaf cool completely before slicing. This bread does keep at room temperature for a couple of days, but if it's going to be around for a while, I recommend putting it in the freezer. That's really the best way to store bread. I generally slice it first so that you have easy access and you can just pop one into the toaster. You can also see that this loaf is a little smaller than normal loaves. That's because it's just a smaller recipe. That means the proofing takes less time and it's also a quicker bake time. But if you want to make more, you can always just make 2 of them. So I'm gonna slice up this loaf and toast a piece, and we'll be right back. You can hear just how crispy it is. And you can see, even while it's cold, it's soft. Now, the texture looks closed. And to be honest, when you see it on video, if I saw a picture of this, I'd be like, that's probably not the best bread. But I'm so glad I baked it because it's actually really, really good. So I'm gonna toast it and then give it a try. I don't know if you can see this, but it's quite moist and soft on the inside and crispy on the outside on the crust part. So it's it's very much the classic boule look. The actual loaf itself, the scoring on the top also shows. So you have a nice crisscross pattern on the top from scoring it. And now I'm just gonna try this slice. I'm gonna put a little butter on it, but you can really enjoy it with whatever sauces you like. Yeah, that is excellent. Again, it's moist, and for a gluten-free bread, it's quite exceptional. I really love having that free-form loaf that feels like something you'd get at a local bakery. Now, I hope you give this a try. I know bread sounds intimidating, but it's really not that hard, and there's nothing quite like home-baked bread. Thanks for watching. I'm Rigel Patterson, and until next time, happy baking.